What percentage of the money supply do you think is in excess right now in the United States?
Well, look, I told you this because I wrote this in my annual letter, but it's stunning that, the reason the stock market went up, dollar for dollar, was actually tied to the growth in the M2 money supply. The correlation was 0.92. So for every dollar that the Fed printed, the stock market went up by 92 cents. So, it stands to reason that if the Fed is going to take $3 to $5 trillion of value out, then we have to re-rate the equity markets by $3 to $5 trillion at a minimum. And then you have to re-rate and re-baseline for earnings. And so that's probably another 20 or 30%. It's going.
大家好，我是 Anson， 今天是2022年的6月29号。片头产 Marv 说的数据是不是很吓人？如果按照他的一个说法这么走，那么股票资产最起码还要再跌 20% 到 30%， 想想就心很累啊。不过关于这一点我倒是有一些其他的看法，我会在影片的最后给出我的结论。那么今天除了和大家分享创投界大佬们对于现在高通胀还有是否会进入衰退的看法之外，我还会说一下我对于最近市场的一个理解。这期影片的信息密度非常高，请大家打起12分的精神认真观看了。
Look, here's the thing. I think we have to also be sensitive to the fact that the Fed operates on a certain class of data. And that data in the 21st century is pretty pathetic. Nick, you can probably find this, but there was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, that really walked through how CPI is calculated. And it's a bunch of people that work for the government that walk around with iPads, building relationships with local businesses in all these random places all around the country and asking them to, chit-chat for 15 minutes and do these surveys. Now, you would have thought that in 2023 or 2022, what the government would have said to, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, all the payment rails, the banks, and Stripe is, send me a feed in the following structured way so that I can actually have an absolute precise sense of inflation, because inflation really only occurs when a good or a service trades hands for money, right? And you calculate what did that thing trade at the day before and what does it trade for today? So you could get an absolute precise sense of it. Instead, we do this random sampling thing and
subjective,
it's bad.
humans, etc.
So if you read this article, your takeaway will be, oh my God, this is very rickety and it drives an enormous hammer that we use to try to manage the economy.
这个真的是太离谱了。我看了一下这篇文章，美国这边竟然真的是用477个检察员人手去收集物价的一个数据。我还在想，现在是2022年了吧，怎么就不能直接对接商店的一个后台数据，或者就像查马夫说的那样，直接和 Visa、Mastercard 这些信用卡公司合作来获取最新的一个数据呢？这不是更简单并且更准确的一个方法吗？我也不是特别搞懂这个背后的逻辑在哪。像这种的统计方法很容易就能想到几个漏洞，比方说遇到因为供应链短缺导致的某些商品售罄的话，这些检察员就很难获得最新的一个数据，也就让追踪每个月相关商品价格的一个准确度大大降低。而且这种通过人手去记录的方法出现错误的几率也是客观存在的。再加上把这些数据回传给政府之后，政府的工作人员是会把这些数据再做加权的一个处理的，那这就让数据失真的一个问题更加严重了。更不要提还有一些阴谋论，说政府会在公布之前再做一些微调啊什么的。所以这也是为什么木头姐现在一再强调我们可能已经进入了衰退的区间。毕竟我们会看到各种领先数据都表示，现在市场和消费者对于未来经济是极度看空。就拿昨天资商会发布的一个消费者信心指数就能看到，从5月份的 103.2 已经下滑到了6月份的 98.7 了，这也是21年2月以来的一个最低水平。针对这样的统计数据，资商会的主管也表示，目前的预期数字已经远低于80，这表明在2022年下半年经济增长会出现放缓，到年底出现经济衰退的风险是越来越大。那么说到进入衰退的问题，我们来看看查马夫是怎么看的。
That's the first thing. I think you need to buckle your seatbelt because the next 3, 4, 5 months of CPI will probably be very, very bad. 7, 8, 9%. Why? There are a handful of components that have gotten completely run away. Number one, the biggest one is rent. And so rent works on a 3-month lag. We're going to reintroduce what the true owner's equivalent rent is into CPI. So we can already forecast that CPI going up. Oil is at $105 a barrel. Russia is basically trying to break the back of Europe by now messing with their nat gas supplies. The German energy minister yesterday said that if that happens, it could be a contagion equivalent to Lehman Brothers with respect to energy. When you play all of these things out, what you have is unfortunately rampant runaway costs that really have no mechanism to get back in check in the absence of some real governmental changes. Our policy on this Ukraine-Russia war, how we intend to sort of work or cooperate or fight with China, all of these things have to get solved. So in the absence of that, prices are going to continue to go up. And so what does the Fed do? How does it throw away what little credibility it has left when there's 8 and 9% inflation prints and saying, we think we're done for right now? You can't do that. So they will overcorrect because there's just going to be so much pressure for them to act.
其实他的这个结论我是比较认同的，因为虽然现在房屋的销售因为抵押贷款利率飙升的原因出现了下降的趋势，但是现在现房销售的数据绝对是处于疫情以来的一个高位的，而且现在房市冷却的一个速度根本就不够快。Fed 想要看到的是买房需求快速下降，然后房价在短期就能受到一个控制。但很显然，现在房市的一个情况并没有按照 Fed 的一个计划那样发展，这还是因为房屋的一个供应严重不足，新屋开工的数据也大幅的低于预期，长期的新屋供应不足才导致了现在如此之高的一个房价出现。而且这种情况是已经持续了2-3年的一个时间了，想要在短期填补上这个 gap 其实是很难的了。而原油方面也是差不多，美国虽然已经基本达成了能源自主，但是他们很难在短期进行大规模的一个增产，主要是因为之前这么多年全球对于新能源的一个追捧，还有拜登上台之后不断推出利好新能源的一个政策，让美国页岩油的一个开采一直处于一个相当平稳的一个状态，所以在短期快速增产理论上就很难达成。想要重启闲置的开采设备的话，先不说油企愿不愿意配合政府的一个行动，只考虑在短期内寻找足够数量并且受过训练的工人这件事情上，就已经是一个相当大的困难了。更详细的原因我在上个星期的会员文章里面有做分享。而欧佩克国家的增产能力也是非常有限的，从2022年5月开始，欧佩克 Plus 联盟的原油产量已经落后目标超过5亿桶了。阿联酋的总统也表示，他们已经尽了最大的努力去开采石油了。当然这些话是真是假大家可以自己去判断，但很显然想要依靠 OPEC Plus 增加供应来控制油价似乎也不太容易。所以现在困扰市场的一个宏观因素都不是短时间内就能解决的问题，但是 Fed 现在就是要看到自己的一个加息政策在短期就有效果，那没办法，他们又控制不了供应，那就只能通过越来越快的加息控制需求，而这样做的一个结果就会出现查妈妈说的 overreact。When
you look at who the incremental buyer is in the stock market, it tends to give you a sense of whether prices can go up or will continue to go down. And the poorest informed buyer tends to be retail. And the most informed buyer tends to be these very large institutional hedge funds, right? So there's a spectrum. And Facebook is an example of of big tech that is poorly owned by retail. So it's mostly owned by smart money. And the case that smart money makes for owning Facebook is that it's got an extremely cheap price to earnings ratio. So you must own it. And what they said was that they, looking at the tea leaves of consumer demand, what they actually re-underwrote was that actually it's not that the price to earnings was cheap, it's that the E in PE was just wrong. And if they pass through all of these increases in inflation and their earnings expectations into Facebook, it's actually more like fair value at a lower price. That's why they sold it so much on a day where the market was up. Now, why is that important? Well, eventually you're going to touch all these other stocks as well that are going to go through earnings revisions in this recession. This is where I think Wall Street has done a very poor job on behalf of retail. If you look at the average estimates of earnings, you will be shocked to hear that Wall Street actually has this year being record earnings, next year earnings continuing to go up. How is that even possible?
Well,
how is that? If you're sitting here, how do you see earnings continuing to go up into these prints like this when you cannot pass through, 80, 90% increases in energy and COGS and whatnot? How does it happen?
I think what people would say is maybe they're going to lower their costs. And so with layoffs and lowering salaries and lowering spend on advertising, the E could go up if people start belt tightening, and then we start having companies that are being run, just more
you'll have
for
to
the bottom line.
You'll have to sell fewer things because there'll be fewer people with jobs to buy things.
But we have 10 million job openings. So this is the weird thing about this recession is because we haven't let a lot of people immigrate into the country.
But is that what you think the consensus view on Wall Street is? That basically a bunch of people get fired, and so that's why earnings continue to go up?
Well, they stop hiring for 2 years in advance, right? Facebook said they were hiring for like 2024. Their hiring plans were looking out 2 years. So now if they go on a hiring freeze, maybe there's, and that's their number one cost. I'm just putting out a theory.
I'll give you the counterfactual. I think Wall Street's wrong.
Okay.
And I think that earnings are going to go down this year and will definitely go down in 23. And so I think what probably happens is the entire world of equities needs to get repriced at a lower price. And in that, it's going to put enormous pressure on these cash-burning, non-profitable tech companies.
Well, that's for sure. But in the ones that are profitable, Chamath, they're aware of this. Facebook just canceled like 2 of their prototypes they were working on to save money. So that whole $10 billion into, VR, I think they're trying to make that number look smaller.
在接下来第2和第3个财报季，我们大概率是会看到越来越多的企业下调他们的 EPS 预期。关于这一点，高盛也是调整了他们预期的一个数字。标普500现在的 forward PE 是 15.9， 而他们认为2022年的一个 forward PE 最差的情况可能会去到14倍，然后相对应标普500的一个点位就去到了3150。其实现在看来，即使没有进入衰退，市场的一个消费需求持续下降已经成为了既定的事实，而且现在已经不只是下游产业在砍单。这种趋势已经蔓延到了上游芯片行业了，所以接下来我们看到企业下调 guidance 其实并不需要特别的惊讶。但是按照 Chamath 的说法，华尔街似乎并没有完全 price in EPS 下调的一个问题，那这就给接下来2个季度的一个股市带来了新的不确定性。不过我觉得这一点真的很难说，因为也有可能机构还没来得及更新他们的模型，这个真的不太确定。毕竟从这几个月的基金经理人调查里面能看到，机构是比散户更早的在布局衰退和滞胀相关的板块。这就很难去说服我说机构还没有考虑到需求下降会让企业下调他们的一个 EPS 预期的可能性，所以我们散户可以密切关注在接下来2个季度市场对于下调 EPS 预期的一个反应。
Freeberg, if the prices of just daily living, of which transportation and housing and healthcare are now the top 3, I believe, if those things go up, would that make people want to go back to work to pay for those things? Or does it create capitulation where people say, I'm moving in with my cousin, I'm going to lower my balance sheet? What is your prediction there?
I've mentioned this in the past, but I think there's another kind of interesting outcome of this. We've had several months in a row of pretty significant increase in consumer credit. And I think the reason is things are getting more expensive. People generally do not like to reduce their spend on stuff or their lifestyle. Once you get used to a lifestyle like going out to dinner once a week or going to the movies every week, and you create a budget, you create a life experience around that, a model around that, it's very hard to say, okay, I got to cut budget now and I got to reduce my life. I would rather say I'm going to keep doing that, or at least there's some inertia or some momentum to keep spending on the things that you've been spending on. And the way you do that in a model where you don't have as much income or you have less income and things are getting more expensive is you take on more debt. And so there is a little bit of a nervousness that I have had that people's response, generally, the consumer response to inflation and to a kind of a shifting income environment like this is not necessarily to cut as quickly, but take on more debt and keep buying.
我们在生活当中总是强调要言行合一，但是只有很少部分的人才能做到。很巧的是，在消费者预期和实际消费行为这2个数据上出现了相同的情况。美国银行表示，这次消费者行为和之前衰退时期的表现不太一样。他们是用3个指标来判断消费者对于衰退的一个预期。第一个是食物的购买行为，报告里面有提到，通常在衰退的时候，人们会更多的在家里面自己做饭吃。但是这次可能因为之前被困在家里面太久了，美国人并没有选择自己做饭这种比较省钱的一个方法，而是选择去一些相对来说比较便宜的餐厅，也就是所谓的消费降级。但是这种情况也只说明了消费者只是感觉到了手上那个钱开始变少，好像并没有那种预期将会进入衰退的一个恐慌。第2种是耐用品的一个消费，从这个数据上确实看到有一些消费行为的一个改变，人们确实减少了家居用品的一个消费。美银这边表示，这可能是因为房市逐渐出现疲软的原因。而第3种是旅游的消费，报告里面有提到，通常在经济环境不太好的时候，人们都会选择取消行程或者选择去一些更便宜的旅游景点。尽管现在的机票是越来越贵，但是消费者好像看不见涨价一样，宁愿承受高票价也要出去旅行。 这应该也是这次疫情产生的特殊情况。所以综合来说，从信用卡消费方面，似乎并没有看到消费者信心指数那么负面的情况。不过现在这样可能就会导致通胀下降的速度不如预期，然后令到 Fed 继续大幅加息。但是最近大空头 Michael Burry 也出来说，连续快速的加息和持续高通胀带来的长尾效应将会迫使美联储反转现有的一个货币政策。也就是说 Michael Burry 是木头姐还有Chamath的一个结合体。他是认为库存水平过高导致的通缩力量，加上美联储加息，会逐渐让美联储发现是时候可以停止加息缩表来救一救千疮百孔的一个经济了。而参考过往的一个历史数据，美联储的一个政策反转会是触底反弹的重要契机。我的看法和他是比较类似的，也是认为在今年第4季度或者是23年的一个第1季度就有可能出现真正底部。所以尽管在片头里面Chamath表示 M2 和标普500的关联性是 0.92，但他的这个数据是从什么时候开始计算的并不清楚。如果只是统计了疫情以来大放水时期的情况，那么可能就不是特别有代表性。而且现在美联储很明显是严重落后于曲线，但是市场这次反而是过度的去 price in 未来的一个走势，所以一加一减可能提前出现真正的底部也不一定。虽然美联储现在一直在喊的有信心达成软着陆和之前的通胀只是暂时的有异曲同工之妙，但是至少他们是不希望经济进入衰退的。所以当各种通缩的力量集体爆发的时候，美联储出来反转政策救市也并不是没有可能。不过在这之前，我们散户的日子怕是不太好过了。那这就是今天所有的内容，希望大家看完之后有所得着。我这边开了一个免费的电报群，方便大家可以互相交流自己的看法。而 Telegram 的一个频道主要是会不定时的放一些数据和重要事件，链接都在简介栏。那么最后不要忘了点赞、留言、加订阅。我们下期影片再见了，拜。